At 6:47 a.m., I got the email. Your services are no longer required. Effective immediately. 11 years of work, gone in one line. No call, no meeting. Just a cold, six-word message that hit harder than any boardroom clash I'd ever walked into. My name is Ethan Cole. I'm 45 years old, and until that morning, I was Executive Director of Strategic Operations at Armax Holdings, a mid-tier investment firm about to close a $600 million merger that I spent the last 9 months building from the ground up. I wasn't just part of the merger team. I was the merger team. I negotiated the acquisition terms. I structured the integration timeline. I built the model that proved to the board we could triple the ROI in under 5 years. And just days before the signing, they cut me loose. At first, I thought it was a mistake, a glitch, a system error from HR. I refreshed the email 3 times. Still there. Same subject line. Same legal signature at the bottom. No emotion. No explanation. Just, you're done. I didn't panic. Didn't rage. I just closed my laptop, poured a black coffee, and sat in silence. Because I knew something they didn't. 3 months earlier, I'd seen the writing on the wall. Subtle shifts. Back-channel meetings I wasn't invited to. Legal counsel forwarding deal memos without CCNG me. My access to internal folders restricted due to compliance protocol. They were phasing me out quietly, hoping I wouldn't notice. But I'd been in this game too long. I'd built systems for exactly this kind of corporate maneuver. So I made my own quiet moves. I started documenting every meeting, every decision I was cut out of, every edit to the contract I didn't approve. I kept records of deliverables, timelines, dependencies, everything the merger needed to survive post-signing. More importantly, I removed one thing. A clause buried deep inside the legal framework of the integration, something only I had the keys to. A protection I'd added to avoid hostile third-party manipulation. No one else knew it existed. Not even the partner team. Without it, the deal was vulnerable. And I'd left it out of the final draft. Not out of spite. Out of strategy. It wasn't time yet. The minute they fired me, they triggered the countdown. Because without me, they couldn't close. Not legally. Not cleanly. I didn't call anyone. Didn't threaten. Didn't sue. I waited. And exactly 4 days later, at 2:13 p.m, I got another email. This time from Armax's general counsel. Subject line, urgent, request for immediate call. That's when I knew. They'd just realized what they'd done. And now they were the ones panicking. The moment I saw the subject line, urgent, request for immediate call, I knew they'd found the hole. I didn't open it right away. I finished my coffee, took a walk, let them sweat. By the time I returned, 2 more emails had come through. One from their outside legal counsel. The other from a senior VP I hadn't heard from in over a year. The third message came with a file attached, my last revision of the merger integration documents. They were searching for something they couldn't name. Because the problem wasn't just the missing clause. It was the chain reaction it triggered. Without that clause, the merger couldn't clear due diligence. And without due diligence, the funding partners wouldn't release the capital. It wasn't sabotage. It was leverage. And I'd built it for exactly this moment. Still, I didn't call. I replied with 3 words, not available today. The next morning, I received a voicemail from the firm's general counsel. He sounded calm, but there was an edge in his voice, like someone trying not to show panic in a burning building. He said they had a few last-minute compliance concerns and wanted my input before closing. That was corporate language for "we're stuck, and we need you to bail us out before everything crashes." I let 12 hours pass, then responded, "Please direct further communication through legal representation." That shifted the tone immediately. Now I was being looped into group threads with executives who'd never spoken to me directly before. The tone was softer, more respectful. First names. Phrases like, "We value your insight," and "hoping we can resolve this efficiently." They thought I could be flattered. They forgot I'd built the framework they were now trying to navigate without a map. I called my own attorney, explained the structure, sent over documentation. He reviewed it and said, "You're sitting on the control switch." Exactly. The clause in question wasn't flashy, just a 3-line condition buried in the 4th appendix. It required any final integration execution to be certified by an independent audit, which I was scheduled to lead before being fired. Without that certification, the acquiring firm had legal grounds to walk, and I'd kept the only certified template. They couldn't move forward without me. Not in 72 hours. Not even in 7 days. And every day that passed, millions were at risk. I didn't ask for my job back. I wasn't looking for revenge. I wanted acknowledgement. Not in words. In writing. In action. Because power doesn't mean yelling in a boardroom. It means being the only one who can fix the problem after everyone else thought they didn't need you. By the end of the week, Armax was circling. Calls. Emails. Urgent flagged messages. They weren't just reaching out. They were unraveling. Their problem wasn't the clause itself. It was that I'd anticipated being removed. And I'd planned for it. You don't spend over a decade inside a system without learning how it moves, how it cheats, and how it protects itself. I'd seen what they did to people before me. Execs forced out just before bonuses hit. Consultants dropped the minute their intel was no longer convenient. I made a silent vow years ago. Never let them be ready to replace you. So I documented everything. I stored version histories, timelines, policy shifts. I even retained access to archived data that, while technically public, was so buried in their internal structure no outsider could locate it without weeks of internal navigation. They didn't know I'd mirrored the entire M&A folder structure to a secure private cloud. Fully timestamped. Fully intact. Now they needed me to clean up their own mess. Quietly. Legally. Before the acquiring company's legal team pulled out. That's when the tone shifted again. They sent an official proposal. Not for rehire. For temporary re-engagement under emergency terms. A 6-week contract. Consultant status. No benefits. Fixed rate. It was laughable. They wanted my expertise back without admitting they'd made a mistake. They were still trying to win the narrative. Keep me quiet. Keep the merger moving. And make it look like I never left. I didn't respond to the contract. I sent them a redline version. Higher fee. Full indemnification. Clear authority. And one condition. I report only to the board, not the executives who fired me. The reply came fast. They needed time to consider. But I knew what that meant. It meant they were scrambling because I had what they didn't: leverage, timing, and documentation. The next morning, the board chair reached out directly. He skipped the formalities. He asked what I needed to move forward. And more importantly, why I hadn't retaliated. I told him the truth. Because retaliation is emotional. I operate on structure. He went quiet for a moment, then asked for a private call with legal present. That was when I knew they weren't just panicking. They were preparing to surrender. And I didn't have to raise my voice. Not once. I wasn't rushing. I wasn't negotiating from desperation. I had the merger by the throat, and they had no clean exit. They fired me because they thought I was disposable. But they built the entire deal around a system only I understood. And now, they were begging me to fix what they broke. Quietly. Legally. Strategically. And I was just getting started. The private call was set for 9 a.m. Monday. The board chair, one outside legal advisor, and me. No execs. No middlemen. Just the people who understood that what was at stake wasn't pride. It was $600 million and their company's future. They thought I'd come in bitter. Maybe even smug. But I didn't posture. I didn't vent. I spoke like I always had. Calm. Direct. Surgical. I laid out the timeline. I explained the exact scope of the clause they overlooked. I showed them the missing compliance flag and what it triggered in the acquiring firm's review process. The audit file was incomplete. The integration map had red flags. And the due diligence portal, something they assumed was on autopilot, was about to expire. Without immediate remediation and a verified compliance reentry, the buyer could invoke a clause that let them walk without paying a penalty. All because they'd fired the one person who understood where the trapdoors were. The board chair asked how long it would take to fix. I told him, 3 days. But not under your terms. He asked what I wanted. I gave him a clean list. Full authority over integration remediation. Non-disclosure of my re-engagement. Direct reporting access to the board. A performance clause tied to delivery. A written statement confirming termination was contractual misunderstanding. No drama. Just terms. And I added one final requirement. The removal of the 2 executives responsible for my dismissal, effective immediately after close. There was silence on the line. The kind that feels thick, like someone's holding their breath through clenched teeth. He didn't say no. He just asked for the agreement in writing. I sent it that night. The next morning, I received a signed acceptance. Digitally time-stamped, legally binding. In 3 days, I rebuilt the structure. Re-verified compliance. Delivered, all audit flags cleared, documented, and signed off by the third party I'd sourced 6 months earlier, because I'd seen this coming long before they did. The merger went through on Friday. Quietly. No press leaks. No scandal. And that evening, 2 names disappeared from the Armax leadership page. No announcements. No statements. Just gone. That's how real power moves. Not with noise. Not with gloating. With silence. With structure. With a plan they never saw coming. They tried to erase me from a deal I created. Instead, I erased them from a company I helped build. And I didn't raise my voice once. Because sometimes the strongest statement isn't said at all. It's written in signatures, buried in clauses, and enforced in complete, calculated silence. The official statement from Armax read, "We thank Ethan Cole for his expert oversight during a critical transition. His leadership ensured seamless execution of our merger strategy." No mention of the firing. No mention of the clause. No mention of the fact they tried to erase me before the biggest transaction in company history. That statement ran for 2 days on internal channels, then disappeared. Quiet, like it never happened. They gave me what I wanted, and I gave them silence. But silence doesn't mean surrender. It means watching what they do next. I took my payout, 6 figures, wired in full. My attorney double-checked the exit terms. Every clause held. I wasn't just protected. I was untouchable. I didn't go to the press. I didn't write a tell-all. But I made a quiet move that changed everything. 6 months earlier, before the board ever approved the acquisition, I'd had lunch with a venture partner at a mid-market firm. Just talk, nothing formal. I floated a theory that mid-level ops leadership was undervalued in strategic investments. He agreed. Said most firms focus on founders, not operators. Then he asked what I would build if I ever stepped out on my own. That conversation stuck with me. Now, with the payout sitting untouched and my reputation reestablished, I called him. I didn't ask for a job. I pitched a firm. Not just another consultancy, something different. A hybrid between ops audit and stealth strategy. A team that moves in silence before the crisis, not after. He listened, took notes, said it was the cleanest pitch he'd heard all year. 3 weeks later, I was in front of a room of limited partners, walking them through a real case study. No names, just numbers, decisions, outcomes. They didn't know it was Armax. Didn't need to. What they saw was leverage. Proof of control. By Q3, we were funded. I named the firm Obsidian, for a reason. Volcanic glass. Sharp. Formed under pressure. I hired lean. Quiet minds. Operators who'd been in rooms like mine, cut out of glory but holding the whole structure together. We didn't advertise. Didn't network. But within a year, we had 4 retainer clients and 1 advisory board stacked with talent the market had overlooked for years. I never went back to Armax. Never needed to. Because the only real revenge is relevance. They fired me thinking I'd vanish. Instead, I became the blueprint for what comes after silence. Not louder, just sharper, cleaner, more dangerous. Because when you make your moves quietly, they never see you coming until they're already out of moves. I never put my name on the website. No title, no headshot, no biography. Obsidian didn't need a face. It needed results. And we delivered, quietly, cleanly, with surgical precision. We weren't flashy. We didn't make headlines. But behind the scenes, we pulled strings that saved billion-dollar deals and dismantled fragile ones before they imploded. Clients came through referrals only. That was the rule. No cold calls. No pitch decks. We didn't win business. We became necessary. I handpicked my team. A former SEC compliance officer, 2 forensic accountants, a cybersecurity expert who'd previously worked on national infrastructure risk, and an ex-military logistics strategist who could run scenarios tighter than any MBA ever dreamed. Every one of them had been underestimated in their previous jobs. Every one of them had learned the cost of silence. Now we used that silence like a weapon. We had one rule: never react. Always anticipate. And it worked. By the end of our second year, we were ghost advising 3 private equity firms and 2 major corporate transitions, each valued north of $500 million. And then something happened I hadn't expected. Armax called. Not the same execs. They were long gone. A new CFO reached out. Young, ambitious, polished. He wanted to rebuild bridges. Said he'd heard about Obsidian's impact. Wanted to know if we'd advise them on a reorg. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same company that once fired me to cut overhead now needed me to fix their structure from the inside. I didn't decline. I didn't accept, either. I told them I'd think about it. Then I watched. Their filings told me more than any meeting could. Stock dips. Delayed deliverables. A quiet lawsuit brewing over IP. Nothing public yet, but the cracks were forming. They didn't need advice. They needed triage. But I wasn't in the rescue business anymore. I was in the positioning business. I looped in one of our clients, a fund that had been circling RMAX for months. Quiet interest. No moves yet. Now was the moment. I gave them exactly what they needed, a silent vulnerability assessment. Not enough to be malicious, just enough to show where the seams were coming apart. Within 3 months, RMAX was in talks to be absorbed. Not a merger this time, a buyout. And I didn't have to sign a thing. I watched it unfold like I was reading a play I'd written years ago, except now, I was in the director's seat. That's the thing about quiet power. It doesn't demand attention. It just waits, sets the pieces, and strikes when no one remembers you were even in the room. By Q4, the acquisition talks were no longer whispers. The fund we advised submitted a preliminary term sheet. Lowball offer, conditional. It looked soft. Purposefully so. RMAX didn't realize that was the play. We weren't trying to buy them. We were watching who reacted. Boards under pressure exposed themselves. And RMAX's did exactly that. Their internal leaks, their rushed restructuring, their panicked shareholder calls. It all fed into a predictable cycle I'd seen before. Desperation. They didn't just fear a buyout. They feared losing face. So, they called me again. This time, not through the CFO. It came from one of the remaining board members, a man who'd once ignored my entire strategic roadmap during the original merger. Now he called me essential. He asked if Obsidian would come in, off record, to assess the company's vulnerabilities from the outside. I said I'd need access to internal reporting. He granted it within 2 hours. And just like that, I was back inside the system that cut me out. But I didn't make noise. No announcement. No memo. I moved through secure portals like a ghost. What I found confirmed what I'd suspected, rot beneath the surface. Missed filings. Unreported liabilities. Deferred payments dressed as strategic delays. It wasn't criminal, but it was fragile. RMAX had survived the merger, but it hadn't adapted. The systems I once built were now barely holding the company together, and no one inside understood how they functioned. And here's the twist. I didn't sabotage a thing. Didn't pull a wire. Didn't delete a file. I simply observed. And reported. Privately. To the same fund we advised. 3 weeks later, the offer came in again. This time double the price, with one new condition. Strategic operations oversight to be transferred to an external advisory body for a 24-month term. They meant Obsidian. The board folded. I wasn't just back in. I now had full authority, clean, documented, and sanctioned, over the very structure that once pushed me out. But I didn't take a title. Didn't step into a role. I stayed where I was, silent, invisible, moving levers behind doors that no one else had the keys to. People still think power is about visibility. Applause. Credit. But real power? It's about setting the terms so quietly, no one notices they've already agreed. I didn't walk back in with a speech. I walked back in with control. And RMAX never even saw it happen. I never thought I'd be in that building again. The RMAX Tower. 47 floors of steel, glass, and posture. The same elevator. The same lobby scent. Overpriced pine and ambition. The same receptionist who once buzzed me into meetings without looking up. Only this time, no one buzzed me in. I walked past security. Badge scanned green. They'd reinstated my credentials without even asking. The irony didn't bother me. It clarified everything. They hadn't changed. But I had. Now, I didn't belong to the system. I managed it. That day, I wasn't there for optics. I wasn't there to gloat. I came to do what I'd always done, set structure where chaos had crept in. I met with department heads behind closed doors, evaluated workflows, flagged inefficiencies, identified people who were good at sounding smart and those who were quietly holding everything together. The same patterns, the same cracks, the same ego hiding under layers of buzzwords. But there was no sting anymore. No emotional noise. Just clear steps. Clear moves. I reported back to Obsidian. We made recommendations. Not all of them were gentle. Within 2 weeks, a reshuffle was approved. 5 roles dissolved. 2 departments merged. 1 executive quietly resigned. No one mentioned my name. That was the point. I didn't want credit. I wanted results. Because credit fades. But impact leaves a shadow people can't trace. At night, I'd sit on my apartment balcony overlooking the skyline. Same view as 5 years ago. But everything felt sharper now. Cleaner. Not because I'd won. Because I'd never let them decide how I lost. They tried to erase me from their story. Instead, I rewrote the structure they stood on. And they paid me to do it. I didn't return calls from the press when the buyout closed. Didn't comment when headlines speculated about external pressure that led to sudden leadership shifts. The people who needed to know already did. And the ones who didn't? They weren't worth explaining to. That's the thing about quiet victories. They don't come with applause. They come with leverage, position, and the knowledge that when it mattered, you acted with discipline, not noise. I used to think silence was weakness. Now I know it's a weapon, and I sharpen it daily. People started whispering my name again. Not in public. Behind doors. In rooms I never walked into. In meetings where people debated moves I had already made 3 steps earlier. But that wasn't the reward. The reward was watching my system hold, even when my name wasn't attached to it. Obsidian had grown. We no longer pitched silence as a strategy. We offered it as structure. Controlled silence. Methodical planning. Contingencies layered into contingencies. The kind of architecture that survives fire because it doesn't burn at the surface. We started advising at higher levels. Legacy firms, family offices, even overseas conglomerates whose boards never appeared in photos. The more invisible we stayed, the more powerful we became. Because every organization has noise, but very few have clarity. And clarity is currency. I built my team to function without me. Everyone knew what to do, how to move, how to disappear and reappear without ever changing posture. No one bragged. No one chased headlines. We were built to be unseen. I trained them like I trained myself. Never assume power is permanent. Never rely on titles. Document everything. Trust patterns, not promises. And always leave a way out. Quiet. Clean. Controlled. One night, I got a message from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. A former junior analyst from Armax. Back then, she was overlooked, underpaid, and probably the sharpest mind in the room. I'd pulled her into side projects without telling anyone. She'd learned fast. Now, she was running a department at a rival firm. She messaged, "You ever think about building something bigger?" I stared at the words for a moment. She wasn't talking about scaling Obsidian. She was talking about influence, reach, blueprint-level work. She didn't want applause, either. She wanted architecture. I didn't reply right away, because that kind of question requires silence. Space. Not to figure out if you can do it, but if you should. That night, I walked through the city like I used to before the fallout. No agenda, no destination. And I thought about how far silence had taken me. Not because I chose to be quiet, but because I learned how to use it. I wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. I was building environments where people like me never had to explain themselves again. Not to investors. Not to executives. Not to anyone. I used to sit at tables and ask to be heard. Now, I build the tables and decide who gets to speak. It started with a routine headline. A Fortune 100 company, one that once ignored a quiet warning Obsidian had delivered months ago, was now under investigation. Compliance breach. Structural failure. Shareholder fallout. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I just read the article once, then closed it. Because by then, we were already advising their rival. And that rival had quietly adopted every protocol we'd built over 3 years. Nothing flashy. Just layers. Quiet layers. That's how storms miss the architect. You don't stand in the open. You build around the weakness, long before it breaks. I thought back to the email that started it all. Your services are no longer required. No punctuation. No thank you. 11 years reduced to a single line. They thought that line ended something. It didn't. It ignited something they never saw coming. I didn't retaliate. I didn't explain. I documented. I watched. I moved. And when the moment came, I didn't knock on the door. I own the keys. That's what most people don't understand. Power isn't about titles, or volume, or fear. It's about the man in the room you never noticed, who made sure the room didn't collapse. And when it did, he already had another one built, cleaner and quieter. Now, Obsidian runs without needing me in the center. That was the goal. Because real control isn't about being the face. It's about being the force. The clients we take on now understand that from the start. No spotlight. No noise. Just precision. I still get offers. High-paying ones. Board seats. Equity. Recognition. I turn most of them down. Not because I don't value what I've built, but because I know the moment I chase visibility, I lose the sharpest edge I've got. Silence. I walk through airports now and pass people who built their careers off noise. They don't recognize me. They shouldn't. I'm not in the press. I'm not on panels. I don't post thought leadership. But when a deal starts falling apart, someone, somewhere, whispers the same name. And eventually, they call. No one knows where the storm starts. But when it clears, the ones who survived know exactly why. Because someone built a structure that held. And that structure had my fingerprints all over it. I don't need them to remember my face. They remember the silence. And the silence speaks louder than anything they'll ever say. Real men don't explode. They exit. Subscribe for more power stories.